Rebecca, you're on Skep Talk. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Hello, Erika.
Wonderful. We can hear you too. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thanks for asking.
Wonderful. You want to tell us a little bit more about your question and we'll solve it for you?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You had me laughing. Yeah. So, I mean, yes, it's the age-old question of, consciousness. But I mean, I think that's one of the things that religious people, and I'm not religious, but I think I'm spiritual, so I'd put it, is that humans are special, and that specialness comes from us like having consciousness. And so I kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit, and I know that that's kind of your thing, human and evolution. So when did consciousness evolve and why?
Yeah. So I think that there's an important kind of groundwork to lay here. There's some important groundwork to lay here, which is that my position, and I think I can support this with, ecological data looking at the rest of the animal kingdom today, but I think we can also, interestingly enough, support it by looking into the fossil record as well, which is that I don't think consciousness is something that is unique to humans in the slightest. I think consciousness is well supported as a gradient that exists in varying forms in just an innumerable amount of life on this planet. I don't think anybody would look at their dog, for instance. People who are familiar with animals, live with animals, like can look at their dog and say this animal doesn't have consciousness to some degree, right? They're not response stimulus machines. Either that or everything is a response stimulus machine, and we're just really complicated versions of it. I think one or both. Like I think that is a definite possibility that we're just these really, really complicated stimulus response machines. If there is something greater, like if there is a level to consciousness that is like more not supernatural isn't the word, but like metaphysical, I guess, like something that we can't investigate with the natural world. I don't think that it can be supported, that the notion can be supported that that is exclusive to humans either. So even if something like that exists, that too is a gradient. And I think the best way that you can support that is to ask the simple question, right? Like, what do humans do that nothing else does? Like, categorically speaking, not in degree, right? So there's a great many things that humans do that are special, right? But there's a great many things that every organism on this planet does that is special and unique to it. Chimpanzees are unmatched, for example, in their short-term memory. We lose to them every time we get tested on short-term memory sequences to our closest living relatives, right? But when it comes to things like, okay, are we alone in our ability to empathize? Of course not, right? We see empathy exist in a great many other taxa, from our ape cousins to other primates, right? Like other anthropoids to proboscideans, cetaceans. We see it in crows. We see it in even in other mammals that we wouldn't typically consider as being empathetic, right? Like rats, for example. And the late Franz de Waal did a wonderful survey of this experiment in his book, Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are? Which it's a really fun title for a text. But he talks about how rats, if you put them in a enclosure together and you give a rat basically the option of having like a treat, which is something that everything loves. Rats love a little sweet treat as just as much as humans do, or to save a companion that's currently trapped. They will choose to save their friend over being rewarded with a treat. This is something, well, I should say some of the time, which is also something that humans do some of the time, right? We have innumerable anecdotal accounts in primatology that have been published in journals of other primates risking their lives for non-related family members, both in the wild and in captivity. We just last week saw an account, no, this wasn't last week, this was 2 weeks ago, an account of Asian elephants burying their dead calves, like actually trowing out a hole, dropping a calf in the hole, and partially covering it up with dirt. This is very reminiscent of what we see in African elephants, who revisit the sites of where their loved ones have died, right? And they revisit the bones and pick them up and place them on top of each other. They do all sorts of weird stuff that doesn't make any sense to us, but is just incredibly familiar at a level that I think everyone can appreciate. Right? It's grief. You miss them, right? So what about humans is actually unique categorically. And Robert Sapolsky, a famous primatologist, I've talked about him many times on Skep Talk, right? But he categorized all types of behaviors that humans do as basically either something that is completely unchanged in other animals, something that we dial up to 11, or something that is truly unique, but still an elaboration on a prior form. And he argued that the only thing that humans can do, to our knowledge, that nothing else living can do, is empathize across space and time, and even with the fictional. Right? So a chimpanzee cannot empathize, to our knowledge, with like a picture of a cartoon dog. But you can look at a picture of a cartoon dog and feel sad because, oh, it's look at him, he's sad. You empathize with it. But is that a categorical difference? I and Robert Sapolsky would argue no. That's just empathy, again, taken to a more extreme degree. No different than how our language is vocalization taken to another degree. So I think that when it comes to the emergence of consciousness, that is something that exists in humans today and in various other animals today and in innumerable taxa of animals today in varying forms. I think we can all agree that like an earthworm is probably less conscious than a dog is, right? But can we quantify that? I don't know. So I would say that the hard problem of consciousness is still an issue, but whatever consciousness is, it is not unique to us, would be my argument.
Right. I like that, the gradient. It just seems that we went so hard so fast to get to, being able to do like nuclear physics, as we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Whereas
That's an
my dog
interesting.
is still like,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say, compared to my dog, who's still, confused about where did the toy go.
Right.
So I just find that really fascinating. That you're right. It is a gradient, isn't it?
Well, I think the problem with that though is like, yeah, there's obviously a clear difference in what humans are doing and what, like, for instance, our dogs are doing. Um, I would argue again that it's not a categorical one, but one of degree. But I would also point out the fact that what humans are doing that is unique today, right? Like having this conversation over this advanced technology. This advanced technology is just an elaboration over the course of millennia of tools, right? This is just tools on tools on tools, tweaking prior generations' tools. And we're only able to do that because we have the written language, which the written language only emerged, over the past 10,000 years, thereabouts, right? So because of that, are we to say that the humans, the human species itself, which has been around for 300,000 years, was not conscious for the first 290,000 because they didn't have the technology that we have? I would argue that they were exactly as capable as we are, but we're born in a time period where we can build upon what previous humans did. Without that ability, right? Like if Einstein had been born before Newton, he would never have invented relativity because no one had done Newtonian physics yet, right? He was only able to do what he did because Newton did the groundwork for the prior ideas. Now, maybe he would have invented Newtonian physics, but he wouldn't have been able to make it to relativity. We're only able to do the things that we do because of those that came before. We stand on the shoulders of giants.
Right. So here's a fun question. This is okay. So I watched Meg 2 yesterday. Are you familiar with the Megalodon series?
Oh,
Of
very
movies?
much so. Yeah, with Jason Statham,
Okay.
yes. I'm familiar with the
Yeah.
Meg movie.
All right. So I think they died out about 2.5 million years ago. So there were hominins around then, right?
Yeah,
So
if we're talking about,
technically,
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
if they were around 2.5 million years ago, we have seen the megalodons like in our history.
Can you imagine being Homo erectus walking on the coast? Well, 2.5. Can you imagine being Homo habilis walking on the coast, right, of the Indian Ocean, and you look out and you see a megalodon fin pierce the surface just briefly before it goes back under, and you're thinking to yourself, "Yeah, I'm good. Like I'm good. I don't think we need to do any expansion out of Africa just yet. I don't want to go anywhere else other than right here, nice and inland. This is fine for me. But yeah, like hominins, it's entirely possible. I'd be surprised if it wasn't the case that some hominin at some point didn't see a megalodon. The types of animals that we shared the world with over the course of even just being in genus Homo is just jaw dropping. The menagerie of life that we were on the same planet as would have just been, gosh, to see some of it, right? To see some of these enormous proboscideans, these ancient crocodilians, much larger than the ones that we have today, right? Varieties of big cats, varieties of gigantic rhinos, right? Like trundling across the steppes of Europe. It would have been insane. And in some areas, things were completely reversed, right? Like Homo floresiensis makes it to the island of Flores and encounters dwarf stegodon elephants and gigantic storks and gigantic rats and gigantic Komodo dragons. And you're just like, what the hell is going on? Like, it would have been so insane to see. But yeah, so like technically, I guess you could say, assuming that we're talking, I don't know the time frame that megalodon existed. I'm sure a species of the genus megalodon, which is like Carcharodonta or something like that. I think thereabouts. Some fish person is going to get mad at me, but if we shared the world with them, I think there's no doubt that someone somewhere saw one, even if it was like washed up on the beach. Can you imagine that? Right, like you're on the coast of Kenya and you're walking along because your tribe just happens to live close to the coast, and you're walking along the sand and you see out in the distance this behemoth washed up on the shore, bloated in the sun. It's just a megalodon. Like, gosh, that would have been insane.
Yeah, I'm surprised that we survived at all, actually. Yeah. So that was kind of like it was me thinking about that scenario, which, although it's silly, got me thinking about consciousness in general, and how we, I guess, evolved it more on that gradient. So
I think
cool.
I think that with a gradient, one thing that can kind of help bridge that mental gap is you look at things now, right? Humans now seem way different than everyone else around us. But if you look through our ancestors and kind of investigate the tool use and the art that you can see from some of our ancestors moving to now, I think it's a lot easier to kind of visualize that as the gradient. It can be hard to see like how you go from a chimpanzee like ancestor to a nuclear physicist, but perhaps it's easier to see how you go from a nuclear physicist down through recorded history, and then starting from there, look at some of our other hominid ancestors, and it kind of you can kind of see that blurring of the lines as time goes on.
Yeah, you're right. It is. I think that's where the disconnect is. Is that we're not really thinking about what came before. We really have only been able to see our generation until like fairly recently.
Well, and the ideas that we've been able to elaborate on, again, we're only able to do it because someone else did it first, right? Like there's a reason why, you use the phrase "we stand on the shoulders of giants," because it's like every individual human doesn't individually have to rediscover everything up until now, because the written language allows us to record it. And then you can simply read all the legwork that someone else has done and then say, oh, now what if we elaborate on this in this cool new direction? But that takes time. Technology is exponential, and that's something that we've seen even in recorded history, right? Like looking at the difference in technology when the first plane was invented versus now. And all of this has happened in the past 200 years. So it's like, where will we be in another 200 years? Will it be as exponential? The argument goes that yeah, it will be, because more people are learning from more discoveries and we have it all written down. So it's like, if you take that back in time, right, it's going to become less and less exponential until eventually, like, you see why it takes so long to make these early steps. Because it's like, okay, well, let's say you're a hominin, let's say you're Homo sapiens living 150,000 years ago. Well, you can't exactly sit down and think about all the art they draw on the wall when it's like your family is starving and winter is coming. Like, you've got bigger things on your plate than making art in a cave. Like, we're only able to make all of these discoveries because we got the basics figured out, which is, how do we eat when the weather doesn't allow us to eat, right? How do we How do we move away from things like earlier hunting and gathering, right? How do we move away from staying in one place, right? Having these nomadic societies and control the environment around us. All of these are steps that have to happen before the very basics of art and technology and civilization can occur. So it's I think Jordan's absolutely right. You have to take a step back and say, okay, like instead of going from point A to point Z, go from point A to point B, and then B to C, and then C to D, and then so on and so forth.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Did that answer your question?
Well,
Did we solve it?
Yeah. Yeah. It's just it's just something that's really it kind of trips me out in a way, like that there isn't another animal being on the same like level as we are, and whether that's because they all died out or they just didn't get as far as fast for some reason. That has always sort of bothered me. Or not bothered me, but interested me.
I mean, careful. You're talking to Erika about hominid evolution.
I know, Jordan's like, we will never get out of here. This will go till midnight if you keep asking questions like that. I was opening my mouth and I was like, ooh, nope, I've done enough monologuing for this call. So I have something to say.
One thing I'll just say, like, we are the ones who survive, right? If you played the world over again, we could very easily be a different species of hominid talking about how we made it and those Homo sapiens idiots didn't, but I think you can, if you investigate the evidence looking back, I can feel a lot of kinship with our ancestors. For example, Forrest tells a story of a hominid where there was an example of a very old member of the species, probably had no teeth by the end, and so someone would have had to have mashed this guy's food up and like fed him, like he was somebody's like grandfather that they took care of as a hunter-gatherer, and that's something that feels very human, right?
Well, and that individual actually, Jordan, is from the Dmanisi collection, right, of skulls. So we're talking hominins that are almost 2 million years old. So almost 2 million years ago, we were capable, our lineage was capable of saying, okay, like this person's hurt and I don't want them to die. So I will do what I can to make sure that they don't. We have healed fractures that would have required the help of other members of your group in Neanderthals and in Homo erectus and in the group that we consider like the East Asian archaics, right? Like potentially Denisovans and things like that. And it's so familiar, whether we're talking about things like healing wounds or the types of tools that they used, right? Like Neanderthals used every type of tool that we used, right? They were really, really good at what they did. And if you want to calculate success by time on this planet, Neanderthals emerge in the fossil record roughly 400,000 years ago, taking a conservative approach, which means at present, they've still got us beat as far as time spent on the planet by about 60,000 years. We're still, thereabouts. So we're still behind on that. Now, why Homo sapiens is here and nothing else is an interesting question to ask. But I think you can answer it in a pretty simple way, unfortunately, by looking at how Homo sapiens treats Homo sapiens. Like, we managed to find reasons to kill each other and wipe each other out, even though we're one of the least genetically diverse species of ape, potentially the least genetically diverse species of ape. We do it on skin color, on religion, on where you were born. We do it on all sorts of different stuff. So what hope did another hominin have with like living, sharing the earth with us if we managed to take tribalism to such myopic places? It's a sad thing to think about, but it's like, I think it's an important one in explaining why we're the only ones left. Now, I don't think that we systematically exterminated other hominins. I don't think that that's how it went. But I also think that when you have that type of attitude combined with things like a rapidly changing climate and potentially in humans, the propensity to innovate, depending on how some of those genetic differences end up hashing out between anatomically modern, anatomically archaic Homo sapiens and then Neanderthals and Denisovans. Well, it all kind of forms an equation that seems to answer the question pretty well. We were hostile towards those who weren't in our in group, and we were better at surviving in certain conditions that happened to be favored roughly 40,000 years ago. That's so sad, but it might be the case. And unfortunately, our extreme tribalism is often pointed to as the reason why we're so empathetic to those in our in group and so vicious to those in our out group. It's two sides of the same coin.
Right, right. So, yeah, our strength with the other's destruction.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, cool. I'll go off the line now and let you take another call. But thanks for chatting with me about that. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for the wonderful question. I'm always happy when I have an opportunity to monologue at the expense of my co-host about hominin evolution.
Yeah,
I know who I'm on
I
here
enjoy
with.
your monologue.
You teed me up, and you
If I
could see
had
the panic in Jordan's eyes. He was like, "Please don't do this to me."
Oh, did
Thank
Jordan
you so
say
much.
that he's a Shroud of Turin expert?
He is.
Or was that a joke?
I don't know about expert, but
He's a Shroud of Turin expert. This guy right here. You're talking about the Shroud of Turin guy here on the internet.
So, just as a side point, I'm a printmaker. So, when you said that, it got me thinking about how you make marks on paper and how you make marks on fabric, like the Shroud of Turin. Whoever did that must have tried it a number of different times in order to get that imprint tape. So that's kind of an interesting thing to think about. It doesn't,
yeah, I mean, I
happen
wish
on one go.
I wish we had some examples of his failed work because that would make our discussions now a lot easier. But we have to work with what we have.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, guys.
Thank you, Rebecca. Take care.
Hello, I'm Jimmy Snow, executive producer of The Line, and I only became a woodworker for the puns. That's not important. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so on our Patreon or as a channel member, and you can actually support specific shows and specific hosts in special tiers on those. Check those options out. Also, you can leave a super thanks and get a little highlighted deal. But if all else fails, you can always you can subscribe and leave a comment. Now, here are some suggestions because I don't care about the algorithm. I am the algorithm. Bye.